Welcome to Politics in the Pub. It's obvious that we should have tried, which we did, to find a slightly bigger venue, but this is a cosy, important venue for Politics in the Pub. And long may it go on, because public forums like this in the present state of affairs in Australia are absolutely imperative. We want to welcome John, who really is one of the perhaps the bravest, the most significant filmmaker, journalist, author, critic that Australia can do. Up to 20 films, documentaries, I've probably got my mental arithmetic slightly incorrect, as many books. So welcome to Politics in the Pub, and particular welcome to John. I want to start the conversation with two particular dates in mind, John. One is 2009, when he won the very significant Sydney Peace Prize, and followed in the steps of people like Archbishop Tutu, Mary Robinson, Bill Dean, Patrick Dodson, Hans Blix, and Arundhati Roy, and the wonderful Palestinian leader, Dr. Hanan Ashrawi. So that's one date. The other date I have in mind, John, is 1821, almost 200 years before that, when another significant person arrived in Australia, but in leg irons from Ireland. Your great-great-great-grandfather, to be punished for insurrection and uttering unlawful oaths. Now, I mean, John has been uttering unlawful oaths for over 70 years. I just wonder if you think the legacy of that great-great-grandfather has given you the guts and the skills to do what you do.
Well, I think it's interesting. The uttering unlawful oaths was the same charge that the 12 model martyrs got. But I think Francis McCarthy, who was my great-great-great-great-grandfather, was merely objecting to starving to death, as a lot of Irish people then were. I traced the records of his trial in Cork, and he did make quite a spirited speech about not going to Australia, which I thought was quite significant. But he did go, and the good news was he married another convict, Mary Palmer. The two of them lived incredibly to almost 90 and had about a dozen children, several of whom died, but the fact that they survived was quite extraordinary. She arrived at the age of 17. She was called a prostitute in the trial report in the London Gazette. She was an Irish below stairs woman, and was sacked from a number of jobs. She went on the streets as part of an all-female gang. They used to rob their prospective clients before any transaction could happen.
I thought they did it afterwards, John.
Well, they may have done it afterwards or not, but anyway, poor Mary, she was only spared the noose at Newgate Prison because she was pregnant. And the extraordinary thing is both of them survived the trip out. So that's the history. How much of that has dripped down to me, I don't know, but I must say, if we can be proud of a bit of history, I think I'm proud of them both. Yeah.
Let's switch to somebody who has been incarcerated in a way for almost 4 years now, for also, at least metaphorically, uttering unlawful oaths on our behalf, Julian Assange. You've written almost optimistically in the past few days that this might be the end of the road. The findings by the UN, the special panel. Are you really confident that that could be the end of the road?
No, not too confident, Stuart, but I think it is the beginning of the beginning. This judgment, this decision by the United Nations Working Group on arbitrary detention is very, very significant. They've only made 5 decisions in the years they've been going. They've been going almost 20 years, and all of them have been highly significant. The decision has been adhered to by most of the governments of the world. They made Aung San Suu Kyi the celebrated dissident in many ways, that she wasn't before their judgment, although they didn't change the mind of the dictatorship in Burma. They stood up for a Washington Post reporter in Iran who was detained. They stood up for Ibrahim, the opposition leader of Malaysia, and so on. So it's very significant. And what was also significant was the reaction of particularly the British government. This thug, and I think thug is the proper word for the present Foreign Secretary, who came out and described the decision as ridiculous. Now, this is someone whose government has supported every decision made by the working group, who contributed considerably to the evidence of the working group, who went along with it, although they tried to pressure the decision when they knew it was going to go against them. So no, they don't have, the UN doesn't have the power to go and free Julian from the Ecuador embassy in London, but you know, things move even at a glacial pace. The British government cannot ignore this, and I think it is the beginning of a deal being done. There's a vacuum. What great states, great imperial states hate is a vacuum, and a vacuum exists right in the heart of London, next to Harrods. They've got somebody there who has defied them, who is a fully credited dissident. He has the world virtually officially now on his side. They will have to resolve it. I think there'll be a deal that in the middle of the night, maybe, this is a guess, in the middle of the night, Julian will be given free passage out of the UK to Ecuador. I hope that'll happen.
A lot of the correspondence, even in social media, seems to still want to imply that the issue is about potential sexual assault charges, whereas you've actually written several times that the issue about Julian Assange concerns a Pentagon-dominated Washington.
Well, there are no charges, Stuart. There have never been any charges. There have never been any specific allegations. The whole thing is a grotesque farce. One of the women involved has said that the police tried to railroad her. That's the word she used, that they fabricated the evidence. Neither of them said there was any rape, and the first prosecutor made it very clear, and I can't quote her exactly, but she said words to the effect, there is no evidence whatsoever of any rape, and she dismissed it. She was the chief prosecutor in Stockholm. In comes the second prosecutor, brought in by a politician, a very ambitious politician. This prosecutor has succeeded in installing this case and almost putting it in a freezer for the last 5 years. She's refused to interview Julian. She refused to interview him. He hung around in Sweden for 5 weeks. And she refused to interview. Then he asked her permission. Please, can I go to London because I have to release the Iraq war logs and the Guardian. They gave him permission. The moment he arrived in London, there was an Interpol red alert for him. I mean, there is the dreadful expression, you couldn't make it up, but there is a lot about this that you couldn't make up. And then she's under Swedish regulations, she's meant to interview this person, again who's been charged with nothing. There's every facility in London for her to interview Julian, and she's refused to. So what the the so-called sexual misconduct side of this has been an absolute gift to the propagandists. The media has played the most pernicious role in smearing Julian Assange. Even the paper that printed quite a lot of the WikiLeaks disclosures, the Guardian newspaper, has run virtually a vendetta over the years against Julian. What this is about is a whistleblower. The administration in the United States, the Obama administration, has conducted a war on whistleblowers. Unlike any other administration, George W. Bush didn't pursue a single significant whistleblower. He could have, but he didn't. Obama, right at the beginning, said, as a professor of constitutional law, I stand by whistleblowers, and then proceeded to prosecute more whistleblowers than any president in the history of the United States. Julian and WikiLeaks, Edward Snowden and others are regarded as enemies in a Washington that is dominated by the Pentagon, by the military. That's what this is about. And an indictment has been brought down, a secret indictment has been brought down in Alexandria, Virginia, that is waiting for Julian. They've had to concoct a prosecution because, as Obama himself has pointed out, under the US Constitution, whistleblowing is perfectly legal. In fact, it's protected.
Well, we're on that. Let's drift into the Australia's fascination with and deference to Washington. I think elsewhere you've written about what seems to be, I think you called it an accelerating fascism in American politics, which we apparently condone. Can you say what you mean by that? Is that a reference to the clowns who are competing to be president on the Republican side? What is this accelerating fascism?
Well, I think those competing to be president distract us. They provide a theatre every 4 years, and I've reported on a number of US electoral campaigns, and they're a lot of fun. You know, you get characters like Donald Trump, Richard Nixon, people who end up becoming President of the United States. Then you get the first African-American president in the land of slavery. Gosh, isn't that wonderful? What then? Well, he's like all the others, no surprise. So it's a system that has gone through a number of stages. I think, Stuart, following 9/11, a lot changed. A lot was ready to change. And there was almost a kind of silent coup d'etat in Washington by the military, by the Pentagon. There weren't tanks in the streets, no, but you find in the State Department there are the Pentagon's people now effectively are in charge of the administration. The present Defense Secretary, like all the previous Defense Secretaries, is really speaking for the military. In the State Department, which was meant to be the center of American diplomacy and some kind of international statecraft, now speaks for a militarized foreign policy. And so do we in Australia. We copy everything. We copy it. This is copy country. We copy everything. We even copy, John Howard even had a little flag in his lapel because the American president had a flag in the lapel. When our politicians and various military people have some sort of ceremony, they put their hand on their heart, just like they do in the US of A. We copy. And I don't want to trivialize this because the copying is very serious, because our military people are integrated in the US military. They go to the US. They're integrated. They're lobotomized, if you like, within a US system. It's not as it used to be, oh, the Yanks are good because they saved us during the Second World War and we're on their side and the Russians are bad and they're good. It's much more than that now. We are part of it. We are genuinely, as so many people have called us, the 51st state. And I think that's a very, very significant change. And it really does, like the US, it doesn't matter, really, that who's the Prime Minister. I mean, it's good not to have a fully accredited moron as Prime Minister, as the last one clearly was. This one is not. This one is not, which makes it even more significant and cynical.
One of your predecessors sitting where you are now was the late Malcolm Fraser, who came to talk about ending, in some ways in similar words to what you've used, ending this dependence on America. That if, he argued here that if Australia wanted to generate a sense of a 21st century identity and self-respect, we should cease the uncritical worship of Anzac Cove and Gallipoli and instead do, as one of the significant people in this audience has done, argue to get to not have marine bases in Australia. So are you going to agree with Malcolm Fraser? Well,
doesn't that say so much, Stuart? R.I.P. Malcolm Fraser. He did good things in the last part of his life. But it comes down to a Conservative Prime Minister to be almost the leading spokesman of good sense in the country. Of course, not from the Labour Party. We have virtually no one of any kind of equivalent stature as Malcolm Fraser to speak up, because the Labour Party is so up to its neck in the whole US-Australia arrangement, the vassal state that Australia has become. It's a particular tragedy because I don't think there's another state quite with the same colonized mentality at so many levels, at the level of indigenous people, treatment of indigenous people, at the level of its place in the world as Australia. New Zealand is way ahead of us. New Zealand is way ahead of us. The United States itself, another settler state, is way ahead of us on so many levels. So is Canada. So is South Africa in many ways. The country whose apartheid, our Queensland, the policies towards indigenous people in Queensland, we inspired. But even this is a political country in South Africa with a robust debate. There's a lot wrong there, but it has a robust debate about itself. But we go along with the master. I don't know how to describe it because all the words seem trite, but shaming is probably the one.
Yeah. In the struggle to establish a different and more visionary, socially just Australian identity, and you've hinted at the issue already, it concerns the first Australians. You made a film, I think about a year ago or 2 years ago, which had widespread coverage and huge criticism from the Conservative wing, called Utopia. And of course this week, was it a couple of days ago, the report that we failed to close the gap, and there's hardly any indication that the mortality rates or the morbidity rates of indigenous people are getting any better. If you were to go back in 10 years' time and make Utopia 2, what would have to change to enable you to make a much more optimistic film and picture.
But Stuart, the film Utopia I made came after several films I've made on Indigenous Australia. The first was made in 1985, called The Secret Country. And I made the point when I was talking about Utopia that in the editing room we confused the footage that we shot and the interviews that we shot in 1985 with the film that we were producing, a contemporary film. Nothing basically has changed. Yes, a small educated class, a class that can be easily manipulated, a class that often colludes with the powers that be in this country. That has grown up among Indigenous people, and amongst that educated class there are some very impressive people. Yes, there are some, as there always has been actually, but now there are perhaps more, of the most brilliant activists. You talk about optimism. I thought Utopia was a very optimistic film because it brought out some of the most inspiring Indigenous people that very few people in this country know anything about. People who have fought in a very eloquent way, in a very courageous way, but have been denied any kind of real recognition, both by the government and in the media. A media and a government that erects its acceptable Aboriginal spokesman and calls them a leader, like Noel Pearson. Noel Pearson is the leader. Well, he's not the leader, actually. He runs a very small part of Indigenous Australia, but you read nothing but Noel Pearson and those like him. I don't want to go into a criticism of Noel Pearson himself, but that's what's changed. But as far as the condition of Aboriginal people in this country is concerned, we only had to read, and you mentioned this annual act of cynicism called Closing the Gap. There was a rare article in the Herald this morning, and I'm sorry I've forgotten the name of the author. Simpson. And he made the very good point, that there was nothing about nutrition, even in the original Closing the Gap. And what I've found every time I've gone into Indigenous Australia is starvation, malnutrition. People, a doctor telling me they can't prescribe antibiotics or some kind of, another form of life-saving medication because their patient hasn't got enough food in them to ingest it. That's in modern Australia, but the world knows that. That's what's changed as well, Stuart, that the world does know it now. Australia is on the nose as far as treatment of Indigenous people. It used not to be. People were quite ignorant. They didn't know. It didn't get out. But now, from everybody has been here, Amnesty, the United Nations, human rights people, the refugees people, the special rapporteur of the United Nations has report after report describing Australia in terms that used to describe Australia. No other country has had more United Nations reports accusing it of racism than in recent years than this country. Isn't that something? That is what hasn't changed. That is what hasn't changed. And here we read Turnbull going through the same cynical exercise. He's going to put through a referendum in which we're going to recognise Indigenous people in the Constitution. Most Indigenous people, and I think it's fair to say, couldn't give a damn about this. What they want is a treaty.
What they want is to sit down with, as equals, at least as equals, with the ruling body in this country and have treaties in health, in education, in law, in welfare, in all the areas in which they are so deprived and which they're so denied. The idea that they get a few words in the Constitution, which Australians go and vote on in a referendum begrudgingly, is a joke. It's a bad joke.
John, I want to make a bit of a leap here, but I want to have an exchange with you about another indigenous people that both of us care a great deal about, and it concerns two other dates, 1788 and 1948. It concerns the idea that 1788 is about an empty land, the terra nullius doctrine, and 1948 is the claims of Golden Meir about the Palestinians' land, that this was a land without a people for a people without a land. Yeah. At the moment, summary executions occur every day of any young Palestinian who even looks slightly suspicious, and nobody is being held accountable. Only one brave foreign minister from Sweden has asked at least for an international inquiry, but no other politician, certainly nobody who lives or works in Canberra, has said a word. Can you switch your mind to the terrible cruelty towards the people of Palestine?
Well, they're related, aren't they? These are the indigenous people of Palestine. The indigenous people of Australia. They have much in common in the way they're treated. Until recently, executing the indigenous people of Australia wasn't all that uncommon. Now they die in out of sight in prison cells and or from diabetes and so on. So the two are connected, Stuart. But you're absolutely right to raise it. I think, you know, there are a number of issues, I suppose is the word, that are litmus tests of whether we're fully fledged human beings or not. Palestine is one of them. Palestine is one of them. Another is, in my view, the indigenous situation in Australia. But Palestine, where you rightly point out, there's now extrajudicial executions now are carried on daily. You can read them. They're not news anymore. They happen, 3 or 4 of them, and they include children. The fact that in Gaza is still the assault that took place on Gaza 2 years ago, leaving that perceived society in ruins, that nothing has happened from the outside world, apart from people like you speaking up and people like the various UN reporters and good NGOs, and words of sympathy murmured from certain journalists. Otherwise nothing has happened.
Can I just refer to the issue of courage in public life in regard to this issue, and because I was discussing it with some significant politicians, I think, earlier today, because it seems to me the closer you get to Canberra, the more courage diminishes. There's a sense of fear. There's what they said, it was merely risk aversion. That's what they told me. Not wishing to take a risk. It seemed to me, if you want your life to be monumentally boring and irrelevant, you spend your time trying to avoid risks, because you've not found or practiced the courage to take the stands that are absolutely required by everybody in this room and beyond on these sorts of issues.
Yeah, well, that's right. But look the pro-Israel lobby, Zionist lobby, call it what you want, is so entrenched. I mean, you think it's entrenched in the United States or even in the United Kingdom. But, you know, leading journalists quite openly take the shilling and off they go to Israel to really report what they're shown and what they're told. Where is the dissent of any kind in Canada? Where is there a kind of acknowledgement of one of the great successes that we should be optimistic about, and that is the boycott and disinvestment movement, the BDS movement. Every time I read their bulletin from this amazing man, Omar Barghouti, one of the equally amazing Barghouti family, but telling us of the latest achievement, and governments around the world, universities in California, University of Los Angeles, disinvesting. It's such good news. It's good news for justice. And yet, of course, we hear nothing of it because we don't, unless we take the trouble. And it's not all that much trouble to find out, but it is one achievement after the other of BDS. And I am actually, it seems amazing to say, but even a bit optimistic about Palestine.
Yeah.
That the Palestinians will get there. They may not get there for quite a while, but they will get there. The world, so many in the world, are behind them.
I think one can't underestimate the business of education, even explaining what BDS means, because I was at a seminar in a very privileged part of Sydney yesterday evening. I won't say where it is, but it's just on Military Road. And everybody said, what is BDS? So, but while you made a reference to justice, and we really ought to have a quick exchange about the predicament, worse than the fate, of 267 people, including I think 37 babies, whom, in order to demonstrate how strong we are, the government wishes to send back to Manus Island and Nauru. Seems to me that this policy is born of a fascination with violence to control the most vulnerable, to hold them to ransom, to teach them a lesson, and to conduct this absurd charade that the reason for the massive movement of peoples around the world, particularly across Europe, is caused by people smugglers.
Yeah. But they're all connected, aren't they? Everybody knows those to whom you're referring. It beggars belief that those calling themselves High Court judges, oh, that sounds important, sounds respectable, doesn't it? Read summaries of their judgments, except one, who sending these people, including all these babies. It's so bad that the Sydney Morning Herald has been forced in almost to become a campaigning newspaper, publishing pictures of these poor children, these infants, all over its front page. But we know this. This is a privileged society. We have access to sources of information. And I remember we organised it together, of course, Stuart, at the town hall when Julian Burnside turned round, the winner of the Sydney Peace Prize, and turned round and pointed at the audience and said, "What are you doing about it?" Because the truth is that politics in Australia are mortuary politics. To call them a joke is to trivialise it, but they are the darkest joke. The darkest joke. And we have to go through these games that are played by people who don't even approach the threshold of courage. Stuart, their information, what they tell us, what they are said to represent, there isn't a single politician, not a single politician, unless I've missed them, I may have been away for a day or so,
not a single politician that carries the respect, the basic respect and humanity that should come with this society. And this is a society that is meant to have inherited, what, the Enlightenment, is it? And all those things that have come with but none of it. Any other country, you will find, you'll get depressed about their politicians, and oh, it's good to laugh at American politicians. Well, I don't think we should laugh at them. I think we should look at our own, because until we do something about politics as it's played, as the game is played in Australia, Stuart, you and I will sit here and tick off all these atrocious events, and that really should stop.
We're going to finish this by, I think, possibly a reference to the media, and then, of course, we ought to write the rest in peace epitaph of the ALP. But you've got
I object to the rest in peace.
You've just given a somewhat surprising compliment to the Sydney Morning Herald, and I want to ask you about the career that you've been involved in for decades and decades as a professional journalist. You've written somewhere else that Australia is not a democracy; it is a murdocracy, and you don't seem to have any faith in your fellow journalists.
Well, I do. I have every faith. I'm such a pathetic, optimistic creature. I have faith in my own craft of journalism, and I could sit here and name some of the finest journalists. Not too many of them are Australian. There's a couple, most of whom you probably haven't heard of. So. But as far as the Australian media, the system of media in this country, it's an extension of the political establishment. It's not there to inform. There is a facade. It's like a wall. And this doesn't only apply in Australia. It applies right across in so-called free societies. Where who was it? Richard Crossman, who once said that propaganda is only at its best when you don't know it's propaganda. And propaganda in Western societies is the most potent and powerful of all time, in my view. How could it get away with convincing people who have certain freedoms that certain lies are actually the truth? It's just absurd. So there is a wall. This wall is erected by Murdoch owns 70% of the newspapers in this country. But then I did call it a murdocracy, but it's the spirit of Murdoch. He doesn't have to own everything, because Murdochism and what that represents. And what it represents is a contempt for you as people wanting to find out, wanting to make the sense of the world. That runs right through the media, and it includes the ABC.
Do you think we need, in terms of the social media, some people are optimistic about the possible influence of that? I mean, and that implies that we could do with 20 more Chris Grahams from New Matilda and 20 more Wendy Bacons.
Social media is okay. I think relying on social media is relying on a mirage in many ways. It's like relying on Facebook to give us a barometer of what is happening. It's how many tweets we can send to each other. The truth is, most social media we used to talk about ourselves. Social media has allowed so-called identity politics. has helped to actually, in my view, disconnect us. Look at the people going up and down Pitt Street. Look at them. All the time. There was a very good cartoon someone sent me the other day, and he imagined they all had books. And it was a wonderful picture. They were all reading books and kind of dodging each other. But now, we've become, in many ways, digital slaves. We're besotted, we're addicted. That doesn't mean to say that the digital era doesn't present fabulous opportunities to finding out about other people's injustices and so on. But it traps us as well. It immobilizes many of us. It stops us coming together. Meetings like this is anti-digital. This is anti-digital.
Could everybody switch their mobile phones off?
But it is because we've come together to have a talk, to throw around a few ideas. Sorry?
I found out about it through Facebook.
That's right.
Okay. Well, you would have. Are you saying you wouldn't have found out about it otherwise?
Yep.
Really? That's sad.
Okay, let's try and see if we can give a massive blood transfusion to the ALP before we break for the collections on. 30 years ago, John, you wrote one of your most popular books. It was called Heroes. And the heroes, when I picked it up initially, I thought, oh, it's going to be about John F. Kennedy and Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers and so on. But in fact, it was about ordinary people. You referred, I think, to Irish working class people, among others. And because you went on to say that the values that they held should have, you seem to imply that that's what should infuse and motivate the ALP, if it was true to its sources, true to the people who founded it.
No, Stuart. I think the ALP is a write-off. I know you want to drag it out of the grave, brush it down, and respect the skeleton. But sorry, can't do that.
Can't do that. Oh, okay. Well, that's the end of the meeting.